Good evening all, and welcome to our 12th Young and New Mason Social. And this one is a little bit special. For anyone whose first social this is, we're almost 6 months to the day that we've started this platform, which first involved 3 brethren from 3 separate clubs coming together to keep their brethren from their clubs engaged throughout lockdown. Consequently, it's evolved into a naturally progressive platform that has enhanced more efficient communication between clubs, the sharing of ideas and initiatives to help keep club members engaged within Freemasonry, support and assistance which individual clubs have come forward to help one another, and most importantly, a real collective of genuine fellowship, not just between clubs, but all its members. As clubs, you all do amazing things, and we think it's crucial to spotlight all the impressive motivation and enthusiasm you all put into your clubs, your members, and your respective provinces. A lot of you are really leading with national initiatives that are invaluable, which we're starting to promote now by creating our masterclasses, which hopefully will help other clubs gain relevant information on potential ideas from the clubs that know best. Our guest speakers that are kind enough to present a talk and answer questions, a lot that are actually on here tonight, which we're thankful for, are prominent figures within Freemasonry. And we find it is important to show our members exactly who they are in and out of their positions, which can provide a personalized, informal account of the person many people may hear about, but perhaps not many they actually know about too. Lastly, we're finding more and more through every social that the support from the club's respective provincial executives are ever increasing. And from us at the Young and New Mason Social, I thank you. It is great seeing you all on here supporting your clubs and their members. And I hope you feel as proud as them as we do to have them as an integral part of this infused collective. Another big thank you goes to Clive Reeves for helping with us on this platform tonight, as this certainly would not have happened, and Sean Butler for all the help and assistance we've had along the way. This platform is predominantly about bringing us all together and showing that a close relationship between us all with the same aims and goals, no matter which direction we may go in to achieve them, is fundamental. So, brethren, let's get down to business. Tonight, we have stars of the show, and they are the Byron Club and the Adair Club, with a very, very special guest speaker, our program master himself, Geoffrey Lowndes. Brethren, when we go on throughout the social, particularly with our guest speaker, our program master, please input any questions you may have into the chat function for a chance for them to be answered later. Please, Guillermo, take the stage and present your talk on the Byron Club.
Thank you very much. I'm Guillermo Valdosla. I'm a member of Bramket Lodge 8750 and Ennisley Lodge 1435 in Nottinghamshire, and I am the co-chair of the Byron Club. We do a lot of events throughout the province. We support our members. We try to do social activities, and we have wonderful support from our provincial officers and our patron, the provincial Grand Master. We try to go to our members' various ceremonies throughout the year, and we also try to support Teddies for Loving Care as a general rule as our charity. We are a club that's open to all new and young Masons that are members of a subscribing lodge in the Masonic province of Nottinghamshire. We currently have 145 members, with our focus being member development, social engagement, and our anything lodge-based charitable works. And officially, for the province as a whole, we support Teddies for Loving Care. We started this in 2015 and 2016 with 4 of us coming together, coming to think of a way we can promote younger Masonry in the province. And with permission of the provincial Grand Master, Philip Grand Marshal, we were able to form. It was founded by Matt Limrose, myself, Matthew Triggs, and Andrew Ford Martson. Andrew has left the province and is now in Cheshire. Our goals are still the same. We want to help people with ritual. We want to encourage study sessions, support all provincial events, membership events. We want to engage people. The goal was to have events that are open to all Masons, regardless of rank, friends, and family, as long as it's unmasonic to not invite people. And also, we started in an emergency when the pandemic started, a list of rituals that any one of us could perform and pinch to support any lodge that needed an officer or a bit of ritual. And we still have that list going, and we've been working on ritual in the off season. Currently, our structure is the chair is Brother Kieran Meakin. He's a junior warden of Redcliffe with Hemlock Stone. Myself, I'm the junior warden of Bramket Lodge. Our social media guru, Brother Nathan Davies, who's in our chat, he's also a Lewis, and Worshipful Brother Matt Triggs. Our provincial liaison officer is Worshipful Brother Graham Reich, who is also the provincial membership officer, and our patron, who's in our chat with us today, the Right Worshipful Brother Philip Graham Marshall. Thank you so much for your support, sir. We communicate very simply. We put up flyers in Masonic halls. They have a lot of the halls have Facebook pages. We have a private Facebook group. We are supported by the Nottinghamshire Masons Facebook group page as well. We use WhatsApp and Twitter. And Nathan is working on our Instagram. So look for that in the coming weeks with lots of pictures going up. That's it. That's us in a nutshell.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Guillermo. That's perfect. Our next person that's up is Gareth Bottomley from the Adair Club. If you wouldn't mind taking the stage, please, sir.
Thank you for the unmute. Good evening, brethren. It's nice to see so many people on a Zoom call on a Sunday evening. So I am Gareth Bottomley. I'm a member of the Royal Naval Lodge 2761 in Yeovil, Somerset. As you can tell, I don't have a Somerset accent, but I moved here for work. I'm a member of the Army in a Naval Lodge, which goes down very well with banter, as you can expect. So I'm also the inner guard of the RN Lodge and the chairman of the Adair Club. I took over the chairmanship back in November, and we've had as you can expect, a turbulent time with this year. The club initially was founded in 2012 by various members that are still involved with the club, and it was named after Alexander Adair, Brigadier Alexander Adair, who was the youngest ever provincial Grand Master of Somerset at the age of 35, if you can believe it or not. So that's where the name came from for the club. And initially the guidelines came out that to be part of the club, you had to be under the age of 35. It then got moved up to the age of 40. And then last year we voted to get rid of any age limit so that all light blue members could be involved with the club regardless of age, because as we all know, Masons join at different ages. And you may be of an older ilk, but you are still young to Masonry. So we wanted to increase that. That also then opened up our membership goals to just over 2,000 people that were eligible for the Light Blue Club of Somerset. We currently have just over 450 people on the mailing list that get involved with that. We use MailChimp. I know a few of you probably use MailChimp as well for your clubs. It does have its ups and downs. Some of it goes into its spam. So I would advise your members, if you use MailChimp, to check their spam folders for any mailing letters that you send out. What we've also done in Somerset is we've set up regional reps to cover certain areas. So we have a Southwest, for example, rep, we have a Central rep, and they will sort of look after their lodges in those areas. What we were going to roll out this year, but unfortunately we've not been able to because of the situation, is then roll into having a lodge rep or a centre rep. So we can then have a spider structure from myself down through the regional reps to local reps who can then organise local, local meetups and just going for a pint with each other, which we then thought would encourage people to then travel further distances with a car full of people that they already know. So that's what was going to happen this year. That's now going to slip right into 2021. As a club, we try and hit all different areas for different members, and not having an age limit. Obviously, we have to put on different sort of events. So the first event that we ran this year was a simple England v France rugby union match. We got together in a pub in Bath and had a few beers. Earlier on that day, if people want to join us, we opened up the Masonic Hall in Bath, and downstairs, if you've not been there, is a Masonic museum to the history of Masonry in Bath and all about it. So that was quite an interesting day from that one. We then moved on and we had a camping and cider event post the lockdown coming off, which was quite nice because people could actually get out of their gardens and come to a field and drink cider instead of being in the house drinking cider, as we all probably have, which was quite good. It rained on the day, but unfortunately, fortunately, it dried up a little bit later on. And we were joined by some of our widow's sons biker group from there as well, which was good. We then did a beach day for families. So as I said, we try and involve all different age groups. And this one was getting families involved as well, because we all know we all disappear on certain nights, but without our families, we can't do what we want to do. So we put on a couple of speedboats, jet skis, paddle boards, canoes, and it was really, really well welcomed. So that's in the calendar straight away for next year. And then literally yesterday was our last event of this year, which was an airsoft event. For those of you that don't know what airsoft is, it's basically paintballing, but with ball bearings, and it hurts a bit more. So guys were running around the woods yesterday, shooting each other, having a lot of fun. And the feedback from that was, once again, it was another great event. And that's us now for the rest of the year. We'll see how the situation goes, and we may have some informal Christmas drinks. Looking forward then to next year, what we have looked at during the COVID situation is various Zoom meetings with different light blue clubs. Is we've learned that some people like educational things as well and charity things, and we don't tend to push charity things. We try to just be informal and friendly and be a family oriented club. So what we're going to do for next year is try put in a few educational pieces where we can have Zoom meetings like this, or we'll meet in a central location and just have, I'm an inner guard. This is what to expect when you do your first position as an inner guard. Because on my first time as an inner guard, my first meeting, the provincial team turned up late. What do you do? Nobody tells you. So that's what we're going to look at doing for next year. Learn the unexpected of Masonry. That's us as the Adair Club of Somerset.
That's great. Thank you so much, Gareth. That's wonderful. Just a quick question to you both, Adair Club and Byron Club. Obviously, lockdown has changed a lot of plans for a lot of people, including us as clubs, particularly when we have our agendas set out before the year. But how have you guys adapted through it? I know that you've done your post stuff, Gareth, with your paint, with your airsoft and your beach trips. But how have you had to adapt from what it was to what it is now?
I think so. One of the biggest things that we were used for and helped out was helping Masons that couldn't leave their homes and that were isolated. So we used the Adair network to then help people locally. And there's a few examples where I would get an email through saying, "Can you help this person out?" And within 15 minutes of just using WhatsApp and the members on WhatsApp, we had somebody going, "I'm near them. I can go and do the shopping or medical supplies, etc." And that's how we've sort of adapted the club from that point. And then what we've actually done is we've had more committee meetings. We've had a committee meeting once a month to see what we can do, for members going forwards, because obviously you can't get together. And normally we'd only have a committee once a year. Yeah,
absolutely. How about you, Guillermo? How's your club adapted to the lockdown restrictions?
We've moved a lot of our things online, and also we've made ourselves available to all of the lodges in the province for any support needed. So through the provincial level, we've alerted them that, hey, if anyone needs groceries, supplies, or anything, there's many of us that are frontline workers that can go help in an absolute pickle. We've been supporting the Derbyshire Porchway Club's efforts. They've been doing meal runs, and we've just been promoting their stuff on social media. And we've been doing basically cross the river chats between the Porchway Club and Byron Club because we're both local. And we've also reached out to other light blue clubs in the area to, again, see where we can best help out. But again, everything's gone online, and it's been interesting because a few more people are coming out of the woodwork, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely. I do think it's far more efficient using these forms of communication currently as it stands. But going forward, when we all get past COVID and all, you know, these restrictions are lifted, do you think that this use of online media and these social platforms, do you think they're going to be quite an integral part of your clubs going forward?
I think for some of the educational pieces that we were looking to do next year, I think it will be easier for you know, putting out a presentation so then people can sit in their homes, because Somerset's obviously quite a big province to drive from. So I think using something like this will still be used going forward. But I think majority of people like to meet people in person, and that's what we like doing as Masons. So I think it'll be striking the fine balance of educational stuff online and as and when we can in centres. And if it is in the centre, maybe stream it online as well.
We're definitely going to keep the online presence because it allows more people from further afield to come in, because I mean, Nottinghamshire is a decently sized province, and we only have 6 Masonic centers, and some are a good hour and change drive away from the provincial headquarters in Nottingham. Again, we're also using the tools available to us on Solomon, which is a blessing as well from last year when it rolled out. And again, we're going to try to do a fine balance of bringing people in, doing, you know, safely as we can. Porchway is already putting together, I think, a laser tag event between us. And again, once we can lift and meet socially safely, we'll do so.
Well, there's certainly nothing wrong with good, healthy competition, that's for sure.
Not at all.
Well, thank you too for sharing your club and presenting it. It's been very well received. You guys obviously do a lot for your province and obviously a lot for your members, and it's great to have you guys on board with this platform as well going forward. What we're going to do now is we're going to bring on our very, very special guest, our Pro-Grand Master himself, Peter Geoffrey Lowndes. Hello, sir.
Right, I'm on, am I?
Hey, you are on.
Right, very good. Good evening, everybody, and I'm really delighted to be able to talk to you tonight. I've been told to keep this about myself and my Masonic life and a little bit about my life. All I can tell you is that my family persuaded me to write my memories from my childhood when lockdown started, and it bored them to tears. So I hope to do the same to everybody tonight. But it really is nice to have this opportunity, because I was hoping to speak to you in person, as you may or may not know, at your last meeting, and we obviously know why that couldn't happen. And I'm going to try tonight to avoid, other than on this occasion, using the words COVID or pandemic. I'm sure we've all heard far, far too much about that in the last 6 months. Nonetheless, the effects of it obviously can't be ignored. Brethren, when you asked me to speak tonight, somewhat naturally, my mind went back to a day in February 1972 when I was initiated into the Old Etonian Lodge. I've often told the story as to how this came about. I'm not actually aware of any family connections, or I wasn't aware at that time of any family connections that I had with Freemasonry, although I discovered about 8 years ago that my great uncle William Lowndes was past Senior Grand Warden in Hertfordshire, despite living in Buckinghamshire. But that's a digression. Brethren, I was having a pint of beer one night in the Rising Sun, Ebury Bridge Road in London, and a friend of mine came in wearing a black tie. And I asked him why, and he said he was going to his lodge. I inevitably asked him what happened on those occasions, and he simply said, "Come and find out one day." So I did. To this day, when I'm asked where was I first prepared to be made a Mason, I reply, in the Rising Sun, Ebury Bridge Road. Apparently that's not what's in the ritual book. I remember quite well some bits of the ceremony, but then I have seen one or two since, which perhaps have enabled me to remember it better. Perhaps what I remember best was the discomfort I experienced during the obligation. Even at the age of 24, I found the whole procedure physically most uncomfortable. And although this was well before the time that the penalties were taken out of the obligation, I had very little recollection of what I had repeated. I was far more concerned that I didn't fall off the kneeling stool or stab myself with some instrument that I couldn't identify. It is for this reason that I have, on a few occasions, asked the Board of General Purposes to look at removing the necessity for kneeling during the degree obligations. It is perfectly possible to have all the requirements met while standing, and I've always felt that a candidate would understand what he was repeating very much better if he were rather more comfortable during the process. So far, I have got nowhere. Brethren, I was no scholar at school, far from it. And I was rather surprised and pleased that when it came to my passing, I managed to answer the questions that were put to me correctly and without a prompt. And the same applied at my raising. However, our director of ceremonies, who had taught me classics, was a great deal more surprised than I was and made a point of saying so. The average age of the members of my Mother Lodge at that time was high, and indeed I remained the youngest member for about 10 years. However, I'm pleased to say that I was welcomed very warmly and never had the feeling that I was an irrelevant appendage to the lodge, which I fear has been known to happen elsewhere. I think and hope that this occurs a great deal less now than it did back then, and organisations like yours do an enormous amount of good in that respect, as well as in many other ways. After I've been through my third degree, I, like most of us, found myself on the back benches, wondering how on earth I was going to cope with all the ritual that I had witnessed. I have a feeling that if I had spent too long in that situation, I might have drifted away. But, as luck would have it, I happened later that year to be told, rather than asked, that I was going to be in a guard the following year and would be invested at the next installation. This filled me with dread, as I was convinced that I'd be totally inadequate. However, pride took over, and I was determined I was not going to let myself down, particularly in front of my old classics master. The night came, I was appointed, and managed to get through the closing without any mishap. My confidence increased a little. Now, I was rather amused by what Gareth said about the job of inner guard, and I'm just going to suggest at this point that there's one small piece of advice to lodge DCs. When an inexperienced Mason is appointed to that job, please ensure that he is fully briefed on every detail, particularly dealing with a report. It seems to be sod's law that as soon as such an inner guard has taken his seat, there is a knock on the door and a report, and panic inevitably ensues. My Mother Lodge meets just 3 times a year and has no LOI. We did occasionally have a rehearsal for a degree ceremony, but one was mainly left to one's own devices. However, senior members were only too willing to help when asked, and somehow it all seemed to work reasonably well. It was not long before I was being talked to about joining other orders, and I soon joined Mark, Royal Arch and Rose Choir in that order. There is an ongoing debate how quickly new members should be recruited into other orders and which should come first. With the benefit of hindsight, I would always recommend that the Royal Arch should come first after the craft, for the simple reason it seems to me logical to find out about these secrets which had been lost. Before they go on to other degrees, not everybody agrees, I have to say. As far as timing is concerned, I feel This is very much for each individual to decide for themselves. I seem to have gone blank on my picture this end. Is that all right? Can you still hear me? It's much better without my picture.
I think we can hear you. I think somebody.
Good. Okay. Oh, I've reappeared. Excellent. I think this is very much for each individual to decide for themselves, and I don't like older brethren putting pressure on others to join elsewhere when they're not ready yet. Time is generally at a premium, and Freemasonry competes with so many other aspects of life, and family and work must come first. Even with all the other orders, I was committed to only about 10 meetings a year, and in those days I lived and worked in London, and as luck would have it, all the meetings I attended were only about 15 minutes walk from my office. All very convenient, but I am acutely aware that others travel many, many miles to and from meetings, and most craft lobs probably meet many more times than mine did. Please, brethren, don't overextend yourselves, and most certainly don't take time you can't afford out of your important family and business lives. I will freely admit that I was rather surprised at how much I enjoyed the ritual, particularly the floor work. I was also surprised that I seemed competent at getting the words roughly in the right order most of the time. I worked my way through all the lodge ladder offices, and there were ceremonies to be held at most meetings. I still believe inner guard is as difficult as any. The whole lodge is looking at you, wondering what you're going to get wrong. Will it be the knocks, the signs, or the words? Surely something. I've always tried to believe that lodge members are very much on the side of the junior members, but that doesn't stop them expecting mistakes, or indeed from being quick to correct them. In many cases, too quickly and too loudly. When I've been DC of lodges and chapters, I've been very firm on there being only one prompter, and anyone interfering when not that person would get a gentle reminder after the meeting. I always recall that in my mother lodge, we had a past grand chaplain who liked everyone to know that he knew every single word in the book. One evening, when he had a particularly good young master performing a ceremony, this member kept interrupting when clearly not needed. The young master stopped the ceremony, turned to this member and asked him if he would like to take the chair. He was quiet for the rest of the evening until he was asked to say grace. This is perhaps a convenient moment to bring up the subject of whether it is acceptable to read rather than learn ritual. It is all too easy for those of us brought up learning everything to simply say that is the way it has always been done and that is the way it will continue to be done. To me, this is not a good enough argument. My problem with people reading the ritual is that I've never actually seen it done well. Either the master has had a half-hearted attempt to learn it and thinks he can keep looking down at the book for help. That is simply not possible, as there is no chance of keeping the place and always ends up in embarrassing stops. The alternative is that he has made no attempt at learning anything and looks at the book throughout and never looks at the candidate. Just as bad, in fact, I think almost worse. This does not mean that I don't have sympathy with those who find ritual difficult, but I do object to being told, oh, I didn't have time to learn it. I was a very slow learner of ritual, but found that if I started on the next ceremony as soon as I'd finished the previous one, and did about 15 minutes before going to bed, I just about had it in my mind when I woke up the next morning. It took a lot of self-discipline, but I found it more than worthwhile. I'll never forget the satisfaction of carrying out my first ceremony from the chair, which luckily was the easiest, being a passing ceremony. Although I say it myself, it went pretty well. And the DC I referred to earlier actually did say to me, adequate. I replied that that was the biggest compliment that he had ever paid me. I have often wondered why I've enjoyed my masonry so much and what benefits I've had from it. I think the one thing that stands out is that it has given me self-confidence. At school, I was reluctant to ever get on my feet and say anything, and masonry has changed that, as you might have noticed. A side benefit from this was that part of my working life was auctioneering, and I found that acting as an auctioneer was complementary to being in the chair and vice versa. There are, of course, many other benefits, not least the huge number of friends that I've made around the world. But then I've been astonishingly lucky in Freemasonry by being in the right place at the right time. That most particularly applied to my first appointment to acting Grand Rank in 1984. I was 3 years out of the chair and had become DC of my mother lodge. I was not really aware of Grand Lodge other than via the toast list, and certainly didn't know that my predecessor as Lodge DC was an acting Deputy Grand Director of Ceremonies in Grand Lodge, or indeed that he had recommended me to the Grand Director of Ceremonies as a future candidate as a deputy. Philip Mann, who was the Grand Director of Ceremonies, asked me for a drink one night and explained what was involved and told me to think about it over the weekend and let him know on Monday. I spoke to another close Masonic friend and explained that it would actually suit me better in a year's time. His comment was, "Peter, it's not really the sort of job that you decide on the time." I took the point and rang Philip on Monday to accept. It really is a wonderful job to get, and one is appointed in the Royal Arch at the same time. You help the Grand Director of Ceremonies with all Grand Lodge ceremonial and are part of the team that performs all the provincial Grand Master installations. In addition, you're expected to escort rulers when they make visits, and in those days, before Metropolitan Grand Lodge, the Assistant Grand Master was in charge of London lodges and therefore carried out all centenary visits, etc., and needed an escorting Director of Ceremonies. London consecrations also came under our wing, and being a DC at a consecration is the best job there is. All in all, I was probably out about once a week on official jobs, and as by then we had moved out of London to Berkshire, travelling became a little bit of an issue. When appointed as a Deputy Grand Director of Ceremonies, one is the junior of 3, and over the 3-year appointment, one becomes middle and then senior. In the last year, one is expected to fill in for the Grand Director of Ceremonies when he's unavailable, and therefore one runs a few provincial installations. In addition, the Grand Director of Ceremonies normally makes himself unavailable for one of the quarterly communications. In my year, Philip Mann asked me to do the September meeting, which was when I was due to be on holiday in Scotland. However, one does not say no. On the Wednesday morning of Grand Lodge, I caught the 6:30 flight from Inverness and was in Freemasons Hall by 9:30. After the meeting and lunch, I got the 5:30 flight back to Inverness and just made dinner. All very much worthwhile, brethren. After a couple of years I'd finished as a deputy and a bit of rest, I was lucky enough to do the same job in Mark Grand Lodge and subsequently at Duke Street in the ancient and accepted rite. As I've said, I was lucky enough to have been in the right place at the right time, and what a wonderful time I had. Gavin Purser, with whom I served as a Deputy Grand Director of Ceremonies, took over as the Grand Director of Ceremonies from Philip Mann, and after he had done 7 years, he summoned me and asked me if I would take over. It didn't take me long to agree. The job was going to be more time-consuming than any other Masonic job that I'd been involved with, but at least with a Masonic diary, the dates are known well in advance, and I have been lucky enough to be in charge of my own work diary since the age of about 30, and my job as a national estate agent dealing with country properties naturally took me out of the office several days a month in any event. Whilst those I worked with were aware of my Masonic commitments, my absence from the office was not strange to them. I've always said that the job of Grand Director of Ceremonies in the United Grand Lodge of England is without doubt the best job in Masonry. Everyone is expected to and expects to do what you tell them. Even overseas Grand Lodges sometimes come to you for advice. I did the job for 8 years and enormously enjoyed every aspect of it. I was involved in some quite big events, including early in my time, the centenary of what was then our district of Transvaal, now South Africa North. They celebrated their centenary and 2,500 people attended a huge arena with 500 non-Masons, of whom some were the press, being present. The press couldn't really be unkind to us, as we read out a letter from President Mandela congratulating us and thanking the district for their donation to his children's fund. During my 8 years as Grand Director of Ceremonies, I travelled extensively around England and Wales and made some wonderful friends in the process. I understand that in days gone by, when the London party visited promises, they were pretty heavy-handed in their approach. This was never something I witnessed, unless it was absolutely necessary in order to get things done the right way. I have always believed that a lighter touch gets one's way rather better. At meetings of Grand Lodge itself, which is entirely the responsibility of the Grand Director of Ceremonies, a slightly firmer approach was required from time to time if a procession of 80+ people was to get in and out in orderly fashion. In addition to travelling at home, I went to Newfoundland and Brazil to consecrate their new Grand Lodge and Grand Chapter, respectively. It is unusual for the Grand Director of Ceremonies to accompany rulers to foreign Grand Lodges, as naturally they control their own ceremonial. However, in both these cases, we were the consecrating team, led by the Pro-Grand Master and Pro-First Grand Principal. It was a great privilege to be involved with both. It is only really within the last 25 years or so that we have regularly visited our districts. They tended to install their own district Grand Masters, and we would only go for major anniversaries. Lord Farnham started the change, but it was Lord Northampton who took it a stage further, and it is now unusual if we do not carry out the installation ourselves. As Grand Director of Ceremonies, I visited Barbados, Guyana, Trinidad, Cyprus, Gibraltar, as well as most of our southern African districts. As you would imagine, they have different customs, but they all take their masonry very seriously and are determined to enjoy it to the full. Rather important, I always think. After giving up as Grand Director of Ceremonies in 2002, I had a couple of years' rest, and then Lord Northampton asked me to take over from Ian Bryce as Deputy Grand Master. This wasn't a total surprise, as he had mentioned it to me before. However, it certainly was a total surprise 4 years later, when he told me he was retiring and that he'd agreed with the Grand Master that I would take over. I had no idea that this was in his mind, and already I felt over-promoted anyway. I discussed it with my wife, who simply said, "Why are you asking me? Because you're going to do it anyway." And so here I am. The main difference between Grand Director of Ceremonies and Pro-Grand Master is that the Grand Director of Ceremonies, everyone does what you tell them, but as Pro-Grand Master, you simply do what you're told. In normal times, I do more travelling than before. As the oldest Grand Lodge in the world, we're very much looked up to by most, and particularly our European neighbours like us to visit frequently, but time only permits a few visits a year. With Ireland and Scotland, the next two oldest, we form what are called the home Grand Lodges, and we almost always agree on any problems which arise. We never interfere, but if asked for advice on problems that arise, we will always try to give helpful advice. The biggest issue in modern times was a few years back, when the Grand Lodge of France ran into major internal difficulties, totally self-inflicted. Other European Grand Lodges took a very robust line, but we tried to calm people down and to get all parties talking roughly the same language. It took us 2 years, but we got there. And I think those at the top in France recognise that without our leadership, there might have been a very different outcome. Brethren, as you may imagine, there have been a lot of changes during my 48 years in Masonry. I can't believe that they have all been for the good, but it seems to me that way. I'm in no doubt that it is important to keep traditions going, and there can also be no doubt that it is vital to keep our ethical standards as high as they've always been. But that doesn't stop changing with the times. I believe that in recent years, we have really embraced the modern methods of communication, and what we would have all done over the last few months without the technology, heaven knows. I mentioned in my last letter in the First Rising that we're currently in a chaotic world where we don't know from week to week what we are and what we're not able to do. We are determined to find ways, we were determined to find ways of lodges performing degree ceremonies to avoid them stagnating and to allow the large number of potential initiates to be brought into our organisation. We felt we had done this, albeit not to everyone's satisfaction, and then we have to take some backward steps again. The President of the Board of General Purposes, Grand Registrar, and the Grand Secretary are continually discussing what the various restrictions mean for us. We're determined that Freemasonry must remain within the law, but interpreting the law is not always that easy. We're doing our best, and rest assured that if there is a delay in advice being issued, it is because more consideration is needed. Brethren, our average age is falling, which is relevant and encouraging. I believe organisations such as the University Scheme and yourselves greatly assist in this. You do serve very different purposes, however, and I don't think there's any need for you to spend a huge amount of time trying to mirror their structure. But I love what you're doing in so many ways, particularly your support for the charities. And Byron's mention of Teddies for Loving Care struck a very strong note with me, as I am the patron of it and know a great deal about it, and I think it is a fantastic charity. The main purpose of the University Scheme is to target the university students, somewhat obviously, as prospective members, and either set up a new lodge for that purpose or adapt the working of a local lodge to serve the purpose. This will also probably rejuvenate that lodge. They must then look after their new members and ensure that on leaving university, they are transferred to a suitable lodge in the area in which they decide to live and work. It may well be that at this stage they will become members of your organisation. I very much hope that that will be the case, as it seems to me that your raison d'etre is to increase the knowledge, proficiency and enjoyment of our younger and newer members. You clearly need some structure to ensure you all know about each other's clubs and encourage best practice as to how you all operate. I would hope that technology is available and would allow you to do that relatively simply. Brethren, thank you for listening to me. If indeed you have, I've got no means of telling. I wish you all the very best for the future and really believe that you have a very important role to fulfill in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think that was quite an inspiring talk, and it's great to know about your history and your Masonic journey as well. I think that's great, and well, thank you very much for that. I think we all really appreciate that. What we're going to do now, I think, is we're going to do our 9 o'clock toast at 8:45. The idea with this is we all raise our glasses, all our bottles, or if people drink out of cans, raise your cans. And then we just got to look happy and look like we're enjoying the social. And then Alan Coleman will take snapshots of us. And then I'll hand it over to Mitchell and Barry for the Q&A.
Okay, so brethren, I've got 3 screens, so I'm going to do 3 toasts, which gives you a chance to have 3 drinks. So it's not all bad news. Mm-hmm. So the first one, say cheers. Okay, that's the first one done. Okay, here we go. One more cheers. And I'm just going to do one more for good luck. So here we go. Cheers. All done. Back to you, Mitch.
Great, thank you, Alan. Thank you for everyone who's posted questions in the chat so far. We have an extensive amount of questions to ask the program masters. So we have it on good authority from Peter himself that he will be back to answer any questions that we don't have time for tonight. So don't feel afraid. Don't be disheartened if your question doesn't get answered. It will be answered in an extra that we'll hold and posted to our YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook profiles. All right, well, we're going to start the questions. Barry is going to help me too. So in usual social circumstances, we would get you to answer them, but because there are so many questions, we'll ask them and we'll obviously say who they're from. So the first question is from Lee Bushby of the Dunkleys Club in Bristol. He says, a question for the program master. With such a close history to the armed forces and UGLE, do you think that the UGLE should support the formation of an armed forces scheme such as the university scheme, especially when we consider the close connection between Freemasonry and the armed forces in our special building?
It's very interesting, isn't it? And there's absolutely no reason why not. The problem with these things is, do those organizations themselves approve of them doing it? You've got to remember that we've had terrible problems with some of the universities. The majority have come around and are supportive, but by no means all. And I don't know what the view of the armed services would be. There, as you will know, I'm sure, a lot of armed services lodges already are all around the country, and it may be that is sufficient. But I wouldn't rule it out. Mind you, that's a Board of General Purposes decision, so I can jack out of that one.
I like that answer. Over to you, Barry.
That's great. Thanks, Mitch. So, Peter, the next question is, what is your view on trying to balance keeping an initiation path open for prospective brothers and trying to keep the intrinsic nature of the ritual, especially in times like COVID, where we've had to change the ceremony?
Well, I think one of the things we really tried to do when the ritual was looked at for this purpose was to keep the dignity of the ceremony. And I mean, we've been, as you might imagine, had criticism from left, right, and centre particularly about the dark glasses, the dignity of it is very important. So is the mystique of it. And what I would hate is anyone to think that we're allowing Freemasonry just to become a run-of-the-mill organisation. We've no intention of doing that. And I think it's far, provided we keep the dignity, to keep lodges away from stagnating and unable to do any ceremonial degree ceremonies is the most important thing of all. It keeps the lodges alive. I do think that's very important.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mitch.
Thank you. That previous question was from Daniel Kimmons of the Crane Lodge 2660 of East Kent Light Blues Brothers. Okay, the next question comes from Gareth, the chairman of the Adair Club. Thanks for your question again, Gareth. For the provincial for the program master, beg your pardon, which is the one lodge in your travels that sticks in your mind for any reason in particular?
Ooh, I think probably one in Barbados when I was Grand Director of Ceremonies. And it was the first time I've seen, I'm a great believer in spreading ritual around lodges and not the master not having to do everything himself. Perfectly entitled to, but I think there's no reason not to. And they were doing a third degree. I was escorting Lord Northampton, and it was a real blackout. And they used 6 past masters during the ceremony, and they all performed their bit of ritual from where they were sitting. They stood up and did it. None of us had the slightest idea where they were. It was so dark, but it was done simply beautifully. And I particularly remember trying to process out. They don't normally process out in districts, but with the programme master, as Lord Northampton was present, they thought they wanted to try. It didn't go well, and I had to call a halt to it eventually when I saw Lord Northampton in tears as to what was going on. So we called a halt and just made our way down for a drink. But it was a wonderful evening, but there have been many of them.
Fantastic, thank you.
The next question is from Gary Logie from the Sarsons Club. He would like to know, he's about to take the leap from to becoming the junior deacon. He isn't going to be the inner guard, and he would want to know from you, if you have anything, any hints or tips about what pitfalls to avoid in becoming a junior deacon.
Well, first of all, say he's jolly lucky not to have to do inner guard. My tip always for deacons is remember who is the important person in the room. It's the candidate, and therefore make sure you look after the candidate. Certainly meet him beforehand, show him how you're going to be holding him and leading him around when we get back to being able to do it that way. And when you get to the various wardens' chairs or later on to the master's chair, don't take over. You're not the important person. Make sure that you talk reasonably quietly. Obviously, you must be heard, but make sure he's the person who everybody concentrates their minds on. I think that's the key to it.
Great, thank you.
Fantastic. This question is from Kevin Ebbs of Nor Lodge 3610, and he says, do you think that a guided tour of Freemasons Hall should be offered to all entered apprentice Freemasons?
It is.
Fantastic.
Anyone can go whenever they want.
Maybe what he's probably saying is, as a part of their signing up and their initiation ceremony, you're given all the documents. Should it be a requirement for them?
I think offered, yes, offered. But you know, is somebody going to come from the Lake District or whatever? I don't know. They would be more than welcome. But the tours of Freemasons Hall are fantastic. And they're getting better and better because they include the Library Museum. So I would strongly recommend it, but I think it's up to the province really to offer it, because they would do it probably collectively.
Peter, could you possibly put a bus on?
Not me personally. I'm sure the province could.
With drinks. So the next question is from the wonderful Scott Redpath from Pawsome Semper, the chairman there. He asked to you, Peter, what's the biggest change you've seen in Freemasonry since you were initiated, and what change would you like to see in the coming years, if anything?
Well, the biggest change with that question is the penalties coming out of the obligation. None of you will have been about, but the penalties you've all had explained to you during the degree ceremonies were you actually repeated them within your obligation. And I think that was inevitably at the time there was a lot of resistance to doing it, and there was a major debate in Grand Lodge. But it's the only time I've ever felt uncomfortable introducing anybody into Masonry, is when they got to that bit in the first degree obligation. I always felt uncomfortable then, and I feel much more comfortable now. So I would say that's the biggest. I think I've already mentioned what I would like to see change, which is the kneeling for obligations, which I think particularly for people coming in at a slightly advanced age, I think, okay, I know you can have well, not a dispensation, but if you can't kneel because your knee's bad or whatever, and people of the Jewish faith don't kneel and are just covered. But I really would like to see that change, but I'm getting nowhere with it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This one's from Chris Wall from Wiltshire. He's a member of the Sarsen Club and also Clarendon 5908 in Trowbridge. He says, I'm sure I heard you correctly of your journey within the side orders, and you went Mark, Royal Arch and Rose Choir. I'm yet to dip my toe into a side order, and the order you mentioned appears to be the most logical in mind. I wonder why the Mark degree is prioritised far less than the Royal Arch.
I actually said after, he's right in what I said, but I also then went on to say that in hindsight, I think the Royal Arch should be the first, before the Mark. Bear in mind that the Royal Arch comes under the same hierarchy as the Craft. Mark and Duke Street are completely separate. So what promotion they do is entirely up to them. But each province has its own Mark provincial, well, there are Mark provincial Grand Masters, and I ought to remember what they're called in the Rose Choir, and I've forgotten the name. But so they are independent, and it's not for the Craft to promote orders that we don't actually, funnily enough, actually recognise.
Fantastic.
Great, thank you. So question from Paul Ashby from Cambridgeshire. Do you think that a candidate should be given a printed copy of the obligation, which he is expected to uphold, because it's doubtful after his initiation that he would have taken those in or remembered them?
Well, I think I rather suggested the same thing earlier, didn't I? Bear in mind, he will be given a ritual book after his raising, where it's all there. I personally wouldn't have an objection. Funnily enough, I think I think I saw a question coming through what I thought to be the best bit of ritual, and that to me is without question the charge to the initiate, because if everybody in this world lived their lives according to what that says, it would be a whole lot better place. And I think it just covers everything so neatly, and I I always like to think that they will read that as almost the first thing they do. But of course, their obligations are important, and they can read them once they've been given their book.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wonderful piece of ceremony. Mitch?
Thanks, Barry. This one's from Glenn Wonfor, also a member of the Sarsen Club in Wiltshire and Harry C. Preter Lodge in Swindon. He said, if you could go back in time, what part of your Masonic career would you like to go back to in particular?
My time as
I think this more goes back to the point in time rather than like we had the previous question, your most special time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think your first appointment to Grand Rank when you're sitting in Grand Lodge waiting to be taken up probably is a pretty special moment. I think I would probably pick that.
Great. The next one's from someone called Matty Brown from Porsum Semper. He asks, how did you find the Tri-Centenary event?
Absolutely phenomenal. And I can safely say, because I had precisely nothing to do with it, that I thought it was superbly organised. And it might amuse you to know that I didn't have the first idea what was going to happen at the Albert Hall. And when the Grand Master kept saying to me, Peter, what's happening at the Albert Hall? And I kept saying, I have no idea, sir. He says, I don't really believe you. I think you're keeping it from me. I said, I assure you, I'm not. And after the event, he said to me, wasn't it so much better not knowing what was going to happen? So I thought it was absolutely superb. And the Overseas Grand Lodges absolutely were over the moon about it. And they had the most wonderful time. And well, something, I mean, I was at the 275th at Earl's Court, which was a much bigger affair, but nothing like the same quality.
Yeah, it was a very, very well handled event. I thought, very given some real good care and attention, I think, from everyone that attended or saw it afterwards. Mitch?
It's also great to have the DVD with the Freemasonry today. So if you haven't watched it yet, brethren, please do. This question's from Evandro. He says, how do you deal with the pressure and responsibility as Program Master?
Delegation. I have, actually, being serious, the Deputy and Assistant Grand Masters are absolutely fabulous. Very, very competent Grand Secretary, wonderful Grand Registrar, and a very good President of the Board. And any pressures that would be on me, frankly, are taken off because of the advice I'm always given.
Great, thank you very much.
This question's from Guillermo from Byron Club, who we heard from earlier. How do you work with the other Grand Lodges and I assume districts as well? What is the process for assisting them? I guess in terms of if there is a disaster relief, for example, like monsoons and things like that. And is it easy? Can you make it easy if the younger brethren travel into other countries to visit those lodges?
Yeah, I mean, let's deal that quickly with that one. If you're going to another country and want to visit another Grand Lodge, for heaven's sake, check first with Freemasons Hall to see that we come to be regular. There are, when you think that, I think in France there are over 100 Grand Lodges, quite a lot of which are just websites. And you've got Italy, there are dozens of Grand Lodges. Most European countries have more than one. And we only can recognize one in any one country. You have got to be quite careful about that. Our relationship with them, I touched on very briefly earlier, but it is a very good relationship. And during this the lockdown period, I had Zoom meetings every fortnight with all the European Grand Masters to see how they were getting on and sort of share information, etc. And then we've also, slightly differently, is our relationship with the Swedish Rite Grand Lodges, the Nordic ones, which is Denmark, Sweden, Norway and Iceland, which use a completely different ritual. They have 7 degrees, and they are completely different. We get on extremely well with them, and you're not supposed to go to their Grand Lodge unless you're 33rd degree in this country, but it's been known for that to be waived. So all in all, I would like to think that our relationship with Grand Lodges around the world generally is very good. Every state in America has 2 Grand Lodges. There are 53 Grand Lodges in Brazil, a lot of them we do recognize. We recognize the 2, funnily enough, in most states, because you've got the State Grand Lodge and the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, which tradition is that the Prince Hall Grand Lodge was started by a brother called Prince Hall, and he was black, and Prince Hall Masonry is basically black, and the other masonry is basically white. We obviously don't differentiate in that respect, but we won't recognize one Grand Lodge, a second Grand Lodge in the territory, without the permission of the one we already recognize. Sorry, rather a convoluted answer.
That's great, thank you.
Peter, we did ask you if there are any questions that you obviously would rather not answer or get asked frequently that you might like to steer from, but that question's come up, so I think you're well versed in the answer.
The one I told you I'd be asked.
Yes, well, it's here. Comes from the lucky club member is Gav Jones from the Portray Club in Derbyshire. He says, I'd imagine you built a strong working relationship and friendship with the Grand Master. Is there a succession plan in place for when the Duke steps down, or for when he's called to the Great Lodge above?
I'd like to think I've got a very good working relationship with him. He's a very, very easy man to work with, very accessible, and his succession is to an extent down to him. Yes, we have various thoughts and plans. Is there another member of the royal family who is a member? Yes, as Prince Michael. But at the moment, despite the fact we keep getting told that so-and-so has just become a Mason, as he said to me the other day, Peter, don't you rather think that either you or I might know if this was the case? To which I did have to reply, yes, I did indeed. And neither of us are aware of any other member of the royal family. So where we go, it is a difficult one. He's pretty fit at the moment, and he loves doing it. Is absolutely on side with, and I can talk to him about absolutely anything. And he's always got a sound piece of advice.
Fantastic. A couple of questions just to add to that. Is it a necessity to have a member of the royal family as Grand Master?
No, it's not. I mean, I think we have done for about 70% of our 300 years. I mean, before the current Grand Master, it was Lord Scarborough was Grand Master. So no, is the answer to that.
Fantastic. And my last one is a bit of a personal one. What did you get the Grand Master for his birthday?
Nothing this year, or the one. Actually, funny enough, funny you should say that. It's any moment, isn't it? I'm not sure it isn't next week. But we do always.
I think it was a couple of days ago. But
was it? Okay, yeah, good. Well, there's obviously if I give him something, it's going to be late.
Just put belated, you'll be fine. I'm sure we'll get away with it. Thank you, Peter.
Well, thank you.
Any more questions? So should we carry on, Mitch?
I beg your pardon. Yes, there is a couple more questions. This one is from Falcon. I guess this is Falcon Lodge 8062. He says, thank you, Program Master, for the inspiring, insightful talk. As a Lewis, I was able to be initiated last year, soon after turning 18 by my father. A friend of mine is 18 and recently started at University of York. After finding out both that I was a Mason and his grandfather was a provincial Grand Master in Wales, he was interested in joining the craft, but unfortunately was unable to find any university scheme lodge attached to York. Asking on his behalf, what can he do to join Freemasonry?
Well, we've just changed the rule. So he's going to be able to join. The age is going down from 21 to 18. So he should have no problem. I can't remember, it was whether we gave notice at the September quarterly communication to be voted on in December, or whether we voted on it in September. But certainly by next year, it will be down to 18.
Fantastic. The next question, before I hand over to Barry once again, the next question is from Eric Perez of CK6446 in Surrey. He says, "Dear Peter, since lockdown and new interest from younger joiners, and knowing there is a current long backlog of meetings, what is your take on having multiple people or even small groups initiated in the same meeting rather than keeping people waiting for years?"
Already happens. Apollo University Lodge in Oxford will initiate up to 10 people at a time. It has to be extremely well rehearsed and know what you're doing. But personally speaking, I think initiation is much nicer for the individual if it is individual. Passing, I can see no reason not to be a multiple ceremony, but multiple ceremonies are allowed. But I would just warn lodges to make certain that they have the space and the expertise to do it so that it retains its dignity.
Great, thank you.
The next question I have is from Matty Brown again. Sorry about him. We would just like to know, for some people that don't know, what is the Board of General Purposes and what is your kind of relationship on that board?
Oh, well, I'm not a member of it. The Board of General Purposes is the board that runs Freemasonry, basically. And the president is the chairman of it, and there's a vice president. And, oh, I shall get this wrong. I think there have to be 2 provincial Grand Masters on it. The Grand Treasurer sits on it. The Grand Superintendent of Works and the Grand Registrar are members. And they're normally somewhere, I think, sort of 8 to 12 members of it. They meet nearly monthly, if not monthly, very close to it. And they have to, any changes, like when the penalties were taken out, the board had to agree to it. They agree to all new any change to the Book of Constitutions, all expenditure for Grand Lodge, and for instance, we're having to redo the mosaic around the Grand Temple. All that's organised by the board. They basically run everything, and I'm not allowed. I don't seem to be allowed at their meetings, but I do get their minutes.
Fantastic. We'll finish on this question, Peter. Time's getting on, and we're nearly finished. This question's from Matty Brown again. He's prolific. He says, "What are your main roles in your position as Program Master? In a nutshell, I know you have many and your responsibilities are great, but what is the day-to-day life of Program Master of UGEP?"
Well, bear in mind that if the Grand Master, if I act as Grand Master, unless the Grand Master is present. If he is present, then I don't exist. So basically, I carry out any rule that the Book of Constitution says the Grand Master should carry out. In all, what that comes down to mostly is chairing Grand Lodge, chairing Grand Master's Council. I do go to a lot of the districts and to overseas Grand Lodges quite a lot. Administratively, administration of Freemasonry is not part of my role, but because it is part of the Grand Master's prerogative, nothing would happen if that ilk without it being passed over me in the first place. So I mean, the president of the board of General Purposes talks to me the whole time, as does the Grand Secretary. But I don't actually get involved in the day-to-day administration of Freemasonry.
Fantastic. Peter, on behalf of everybody who's asked questions today, we thank you for answering them so candidly, and thank you, brethren, for asking them. We have plenty of questions still to ask. They will be held hopefully in the next couple of weeks, where we can put these to Peter. So fret not, your questions will get answered and put in the extra version. Until then, I will hand back to Matty to round off the evening, and then to hand over to you, Peter, for a final farewell.
Okay.
Well, brethren, thank you so much for coming. Again, for all of our past guest speakers that we've had on, thank you so much for coming on again. It's been great. You guys have been invaluable. The talks that you've done have been fantastic, in having this personalized talk such as what you've done tonight, Peter. It really gives that kind of I don't know, it gives some kind of closeness to people in such positions that you don't normally get to talk to or see or hear from. So it's really great. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to hand over you, Peter, just to say goodbye, and then we'll finish from there. Thank you, brethren.
Well, brethren, thank you again for allowing me to join you. I shall be a great deal happier when we can actually meet in person, which let's hope it really isn't too long. I don't see us having a full quarterly communications meeting at Grand Lodge, possibly even not next year, with the sort of 1,400 people that we get there. But let's hope that we can get back to having sensible numbers at lodge meetings, enjoy our Freemasonry as much as we always have done, and above all, get these really enthusiastic new people in and get them as members of your organization. And well done, all of you, for what you do, and thank you so much for everything that you do. So good night. Thank you.